Hello, everyone. This is Faisal Saeed Al Mutar, the founder and president of Ideas Beyond Borders. And this is our first live on our Middle East Uncovered Substack. Thank you so much for joining. If you're joining us from the Middle East, I hope you are safe and your family is safe. If you have joining us from the West and you have families in the Middle East, I hope they're safe. And for those joining us from parts of the world, welcome. This is, as I said, our first Substack Live for Middle East Uncovered. If you have not subscribed yet, please go to themiddleeastuncovered.com and subscribe. And we hope to do more of this in the future, in which people, subscribers, and readers can ask us questions about ongoing political affairs and tensions, which are unfortunately frequent in the Middle East. And it's really important to um, reduce some of the noise and for people to get to know what's true. So thank you so much for joining, and I'll give you kind of some brief before I answer some of the questions some of you have already sent. And if you go to the live chats here on Substack, you are also able to ask me live questions, and we'll try to keep this to an hour. And you can always reach out to us afterwards if you have any further questions. So yesterday, the attacks have or the missiles have continued from Iran to multiple states, predominantly in the Gulf and as well as Israel. This morning on the Israeli time zone, there were several attacks and rockets heading towards Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. As of now, there were no reports injured. On the Iranian side, there was an attack, multiple attacks from Israel on Western Iran and some parts of the Bandar Abbas area, which to some people is referred to as the Ahwaz region, or the Ahwaz, as there was sometimes in Persian. And Ahwaz is a predominantly very oil-rich area, and it's inhabited by the Arab minority that live in Iran. And that's important to talk about because many that back to the noise, there are a lot of people who don't know that Iran is a multi-ethnic country that also includes Arabs. And some of those Arabs who have been living there for significant amount of time under different formations, right? In terms of whether they were occupied or part of the new Iranian model. And Bandar Abbas is also the area that faces the Strait of Hormuz, which I know a lot of people now care about because of the rising oil prices and the fact that only few tankers, oil tankers, are able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, which is something that is very destabilizing, of course, to the global economy and particular to the Gulf states. And there are two states I would say are the one uh, damaged the most by that, which are Qatar and Bahrain, and to some extent Iraq, of course. But Qatar and Bahrain rely heavily on the Strait of Hormuz. Bahrain is one of the smallest countries of the Gulf, and they depend significantly on it compared to, for example, the Arab Emirates, and which is lucky to its location that it has the Fujairah, which directs it connectly to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea, that makes it skip the narrow I think 2 mile wide strait that many of the ships that move from the northern part of the Gulf into the rest of the world. And unusual on called usual or like known war times, there are roughly about 150 to 200 ships or oil tankers move every day Some dates now there's zero, and some where there's Iran has announced that if you are from a quote unquote known hostile nation to Iran, you will be able to pass, or your ships will be able to pass. And even though that's so far, I mean, you can track that on some of the websites that track ships. I think the real number is somewhere between 0 and 10 per day, and there were some reports that Iran is charging $2 million for each tanker. Um, so there's that on one side for the oil economy, and the other side, which a lot of people are talking about. I believe the Economist was talking about yesterday, is the Red Sea. And the Red Sea is the other part where of the region where a lot of the oil. So this is the Middle East, definitely not a square, but on the right you have the Persian Gulf, and on the left you have the Red Sea. And one country on the Red Sea that is of concern to a lot of people is Yemen, and that has Houthis and couple other, and that's kind of the predominant militia that is funded or supported by Iran over the past years and decades. And if they do block the shipments going from the Red Sea, which are a bit more difficult than the Strait of Hormuz because of the kind of the sheer size and the width of that corridor, but that definitely has an ability to destabilize oil prices, because that's where currently a lot of oil from the Middle East is being transported for to the rest of the world. Just a reminder, the Middle East roughly provides 20 to 25% of the world global energy. So it definitely has significant importance to the energy markets, and also to the investment markets itself. Where the Gulf states, which are sometimes called the Arab Gulf by Arabs and Persian Gulf by the Persians, is are a significant investor in U.S. markets, European markets. Just in the past uh, 2 years, there has been massive talks about a $5 trillion investment from Gulf states, which is predominantly UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, which are some of the largest economies there, to invest $5 trillion in the US economy. And how does that look like? It's a combination of data centers, bringing investment in companies here in the United States, but also kind of mutual trade of some of the AI companies, OpenAI, Google, etc., opening offices inside the region and build the infrastructure of artificial intelligence inside the Middle East, which now many of the Gulf states are interested in. So it's really the connection between Gulf and the United States couldn't be any stronger over since the also re-election of uh, President Trump, as they have good relationships with him over since his first term. So I know this doesn't do justice to the current situation, and I because there's so much happening at the same time, and the getting to know the facts is not easy. But we're doing our best here in Middle East Uncovered, and to kind of answer questions and keep up, because I personally haven't been able to sleep quite a lot the past couple since the war started. So I've been collecting information as much as I can, trying to make it dissectable and readable, as many of the terms could be confusing and many people don't know some of the histories regarding the the region itself. Two things I want to flag before I start to answer questions. PBS, or Frontline, recently released a very interesting documentary about the war on Iran. I think it's a 1 hour and 50 minutes, and it's a very kind of comprehensive documentary because it touches on all of the different like segments and the relationship between the United States and Iran, and also, of course, Israel and Iran. So I really recommend that you give that a watch. It's on PBS, and if you go to the Frontline, that's where some of the latest documentaries are published, and you can see I believe, the latest one right now related to the Iran war. So I hope you give that a watch. If you watch Piers Morgan, and which I don't really do, but yesterday he hosted Saleh Al Mashnouk, who is one of the leading uh, figures, I would say, in Lebanon, and he's talking a lot about what's happening there in Lebanon. So if you go to Piers Morgan and search Saleh, so Saleh, Al Mashnouk, ALMASHONUK. And Saleh also writes for the Middle East Institute, and I believe the Washington Institute for Near East Affairs. And he did a very good job in kind of explaining the, the, the views of many people living in Lebanon in a very eloquent and understandable manner. So and also I recommend giving him a follow on Instagram, on other social medias. He's kind of a frequent contributor to that. And yeah, that's it. And I'm uh, in terms of kind of live updates, but we will start answering your questions very shortly. And as I mentioned, you can also ask us questions here on the live chat. And I hope that this is helpful for all of our listeners and people who are watching us from all over the world. So maybe I'll start with the live chats, and then go jump to the questions that people have asked in advance, and we'll look at them. So first question is from Skip Walensky, who's a dear friend and and colleague, and this question is: Are Iran's attacks on Persian Gulf energy infrastructure working to pressure Trump to relent? Um, uh, that's the goal of the attacks on the Persian Gulf energy infrastructure. I mean, so for those who haven't followed that, is as of now, uh, Iran has fired more than 1,000 rockets on the United Arab Emirates. Some of those rockets end up in Fujairah, which is the place that I said United Arab Emirates uses to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. And so that was one. I think they attacked the Qatar Energy, which is the name of the company, and they have reduced that did a lot of damage in infrastructure to their LNG, which is liquefied gas, natural gas, and reduced that by 20%. So a lot of from the beginning of this conflict, a lot of people ask, why is the Gulf being attacked? And my simple answer is that the Gulf states, um, particularly three, which is Qatar, Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, have uh, very good relations with Donald Trump. And these are three countries that have significant lobby in the United States. Anybody who's gone to Washington, D.C., which is the capital of the United States, will see that these three countries have a very significant lobby and have a lot of that tries to have a lot of influence in U.S. kind of U.S. Foreign policy, and they themselves, the three countries, haven't chosen this war. So they have the UAE ambassador to the United States, Yusuf Al Otaiba, published an article on the Wall Street Journal yesterday, starting with the fact that UAE didn't choose the war, and I think they have lobbied the United States not to enter it. So I think that now that the war has started, um, the the I would say the three countries, the one that I just mentioned, now have an interest of making sure that there is uh, a much more damage done to Iran. So that's what I'm sensing as a change of behavior. Is that at the beginning they were really trying to get Trump not to do the war, and of course Israel not to start it. But now they are in this space that their economies have been ruined, and they are worried that if any kind of negotiation or a ceasefire still keeps Iran as a kind of holding them hostage. So there are some reports that they are now changing their mind and telling the U.S. to continue the attacks. But that obviously things change quite a lot, and it's gonna depend on whether their infrastructure will be hit more by Iran in the next couple hours or the next couple days, and maybe we're gonna see a change of behavior that they will possibly want some form of a ceasefire with Iran, and they will work on kind of convincing the Trump administration of that. There are some, I mean, additional information to know as well on this subject. Jared Kushner, who is the son-in-law of President Trump, does work for the Saudi Arabian Investment Fund, which is the sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia, PIF. And so Jared Kushner was one of the negotiators of this of the Iran new Iran nuclear deal that obviously didn't crystallize. Has very strong relationships with the Saudis on a financial level, and I think Steve Witkoff as well. So there's a very strong relationship there that they can leverage, but we shall see in terms of whether they want to leverage it to get the U.S. to finish the job, quote unquote, whatever that entails, or have a ceasefire. Thank you for first question. I see from Brian is asking this morning. I spoke with phone with a close friend living in Amman in Jordan, who told me that the missiles and drones are flying in Amman regularly over the last 4 weeks. Why would either the Israelis or the Iranians target Jordan? I'm not quite understanding that. Thank you so much for your question, Brian. So Jordan, of the many kind of countries that I've mentioned, they are the ones who I believe have been the least attacked about among all of them. And why would Iran target Jordan? For a lot of reasons. Because number one, Jordan is viewed, of course, negatively by the Islamic Republic, and they're viewed as part of this what they call the Zionist Zion U.S. imperialistic alliance. So, if I'm translating this correctly, and so they view Jordan as part of that, and they view that the kingdom of Jordan, which is controlled by the Hashemite royal dynasty, as part of that alliance. The reason why they haven't targeted Jordan as much as they've targeted the Gulf because Jordan has much less resources. So there's very little kind of infrastructure to be able to destroy or to able to use as a leverage to get them to kind of influence the United States or try to change public opinion. So that's the main reason is why they're attacking Jordan, as I said, is that they see them as part of the alliance, and that is how they're justifying attacking many of the countries in the Arab world. Is that we're not really attacking the people, we're attacking the governments and also the U.S. interests. Is how they are phrasing it, and it's I mean, it's definitely changing some of the public opinion and some of these states of some of the peoples in these states who used to be more sympathetic to Iran because of its quote unquote alliance with the Palestinians and the Palestinian cause. And now some of the people in these countries are asking the question why Iran is attacking us. And despite the fact that we have ourselves have not launched any rockets on Iran or tried to destroy Iran, why is Iran trying to destroy us? So it's really um, to some extent an information warfare happening in the Middle East, in addition to the physical warfare. And both countries, or I would say the three countries involved in this conflict, which is Iran, the United States, and Israel, the three of them are working on moving public opinion of the region in their direction. So you will see that there is a lot of information that comes out of the region that is uh, really a part of a lot of information operations, which makes it pretty hard to know what's true, as many of these countries with significant budget focused on advocacy instead of journalism. So that's what I think this platform could be really helpful to answer questions that we are not affiliated with these three states ourselves. So I hope that answers your question, Brian. And uh, I'll look at the questions that people sent in advance, which I have them on the right screen, and also the feel free to answer any questions I that comes to mind as I answer them. Someone asked, well, the first question that we got from the comments over the past couple of days, which is, what is the biggest misconception people have about Iran's position in this war that the U.S. is not aware of? Um, th- I think it's better to add an S. What are the biggest misconceptions? Because I don't think the U.S. has only one misconception about Iran. Um, I think that so here's this from kind of the U.S. side of the story. So I'll give you some context, short context of the intelligence situation. So the for those who follow some of the history, the Islamic Revolution or the Iranian Revolution took changed the regime in 1979. One of the first things that happened is the closure of the U.S. embassy in Iran. So there's no active U.S. embassy in Iran. What that entails is that the United States has much less intelligence gathering that it does on Iran, which means it relies significantly, at least that's what I've heard, on third parties and predominantly the Mossad and Israeli intelligence, and sometimes regional intelligence of people who live there. So the kind of the bureaucratization of intelligence or the infrastructure of intelligence that the U.S. has on Iran is pretty limited. Um, and of course, I mean, there's the CIA and other kind of intelligence gathering, but the overall kind of the institution of intelligence is much less reduced there than in other places. Which means we don't have, from the U.S. side, we don't have the information we need from kind of the U.S. perspective, and which differs from any country differs from other perspectives and other um, threats. And I think so in a way the U.S. is operating on kind of information to some extent third party information, which kind of course going to have its own bend and its own biases. And when it comes to kind of the misconceptions about Iran position in this war, I think it's hard to know with kind of President Trump whether it it was a misconception or it was something that he knew but he ignored. So that's maybe a, a bigger conversation to be had. As of course, this is most of this information are confidential, so it's really hard to exactly know beyond kind of say psychoanalysis here. And because the for example, the subject of the Strait of Hormuz, whether uh, um, when the closure of it by Iran, whether that was predicted by the US or not predicted. I think it's very likely that the intelligence services, and not just the intelligence, but also the military, the Pentagon, would know that this is a very likely situation. So I don't think you needed. I don't think that that necessarily was a misconception. I think possibly um, Trump didn't think it was a big deal, and he probably thought that. And that's why I think the second misconception, that's possibly the misconception part, is that and I highly recommend you checking out the latest article I have written about regime change and kind of regime fall in the Middle East as a whole. And I looked at three models of Syria, Iraq, and Islamic Republic of Iran. And I think the misconception Trump had, at least from the rhetoric I've heard, is that there was this illusion that if the United States targets the infrastructure in Iran and reduces the or weakens the Iranian government, people are going to rise up and try to overthrow them and take over the government buildings. I think that's a misconception. And it's really shows some to some extent naivete from the American side and possibly the Israeli side. The New York Times have reported that the Israelis have tried to kind of stir up some protests inside Iran, and though so far these things have not crystallized. And also there has not been since the beginning of the war. I think we're entering now the third end of the third or the fourth week, and there has not been any significant defections. Or in fact, no defections at all. To be honest, I think there's probably the number of defections is really small and insignificant by the IRGC. There have been some people. I think the deputy ambassador of the Islamic Republic in Denmark has defected. There's now some Danish journalists who are trying to understand the defection there. But these are people who have the least to lose. These are people who already live in Europe or already live in the United States. And them asking for asylum is not the threshold for them to be threatened is very low or lower comparison to people in the IRGC and live inside the Iran and inside the region. So I think there was a misconception there, a big misconception that if you just attack some people and kill some of the leadership, suddenly you're gonna have mass defections and people kind of giving up their arms, etc. I think that is naive. Also, we don't know, and that's a question I have asked many times, and I still haven't gotten an answer that is satisfactory, in my opinion. And the answer that the question that I asked, and I'm trying my best to find the answer to it, is that number one, how many people inside Iran don't like the regime? And I have heard so many numbers, right? If you watch um, media in the region, you will hear that there is significant support for the Iranian regime by the people. You go into Western media, I think one of the people on Piers Morgan, Bashir Uncensored, mentioned that 90% of the Iranian people dislike the regime. Where did that number come from? I don't know. Are there any polls that say 90%? That's a very significant amount of people who dislike the regime. So that's number one. And number two, when people say they dislike the regime, does this also mean that they are willing to work with the enemies of that regime to overthrow it? That's the second question. So let's say, and we have seen so many examples in other parts of the region. Let's say somebody dislikes Bashar al-Assad, right? Or someone who uh, dislikes Mubarak, and then if the Israelis come and tell him, "Well, we're going to help you overthrow Assad," that's a different thing than somebody disliking the regime, because now you're not only in the opposing the regime in the opposition side, you are to some extent a collaborator of an enemy state from the legal or from the situation there. So I don't know. Like, I think one other misconception is that we think that just because whatever these statistics say, 90%, 80%, I mean, I'm willing to concede that there's a lot of people who dislike the regime. That's obviously a fact. We have seen it in protest many across the years since 1979. So they're definitely the most loved regime by its people, and I think that's definitely a fact. In terms in terms of like 90% versus 10% versus 50%, I don't know. For just a reminder, Iran is about 92 million people. So even if you can fill a stadium of opposition, that's still a very insignificant amount of people. Um, so that's I think it's the misconception, and I hope that answers your question. So um, now, because we have Jared here who asked in on Twitter, I believe he said, "How how is the Western left, quote unquote, have come to see Iran's Islamic regime um, as a victim in all of this? Is it simply hatred of Israel and the West, or is there something deeper at play?" I don't necessarily think they have something. There's something deeper. I mean, just for context for our viewers, yes, there are some people from um, kind of more left leaning media who have tried to portray the Islamic Republic of Iran as kind of the more like the victim in this war, and they're innocent. Um, and I think that possibly mostly comes from, yeah, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and because Israel is viewed negatively, significantly by a lot of people, including people on the right these days. I think it's more that there's that in which that because the enemy of my enemy, my friend, and therefore they're more the victim here. So um, so that's well, now see now, good question here. With Iran rejecting ceasefire proposals and conflicting reports about negotiations, do you think this war is heading toward a long-term stalemate? Who's even left to negotiate with if the people in power are being eliminated? So that's a very good question. And one of I think one of the mistakes in communication. I mean, there's possibly like this war is like a master class of miscommunication in terms of from the beginning. So let's say let's go from the let's ask the first question here. It, what is this war about? Pretty basic question. um, is this war um, about regime change, weakening the regime, um, destroying the proxies of the regime, making sure it doesn't threat? So we don't know, at least for those of us in who are watching this clear mostly on an hourly basis. Um, Many of us don't know this, why is this war started? Okay, um, there has been so much mixed messaging on um, it is also possible, and that's now becoming clearer and clearer every day from reports on, including the Wall Street Journal, that the two partners in this war, namely United States and Israel, have different objectives of this war. Um, and the U.S. side, I guess the Trump side, I would say, is they were thinking of somehow a Venezuela kind of approach, which is we weaken the regime and somebody good comes out of it, and then we negotiate with that person. And hence your question is like, who is left to negotiate with? And the Israeli side is one of two: is either regime change or regime collapse. So pretty much destroy the entire infrastructure of government and let it spontaneously figure itself out. Like the country could be divided, the country could be somebody emerges um, from anywhere who maybe a former government employee, maybe somebody who's not almost never a government employee to be like, you know what, I'm now in charge and this is the new nation. Um, so I think based on these two things, the war could take a very long time or a very short time, right? Um, so if the and I've also written about this, about how the Iranian government is pushing this narrative of that this is not just a war against the government, it's a war against Shia Islam. It's a war against the Shia Islam is a major sect of the Islamic faith, and which is believed by roughly 200 million or so, 250 million. And if you look at so many people in Iraq, so many people in Lebanon and Yemen, as I monitor kind of the media of many of these countries, you will see that there's a lot of people who are willing to fight for the Islamic Republic. So if the goal, if people there see that this is a war to overthrow the regime, they might join. They don't have to be Iranians. They just have to be Shia Muslims, as Islamic Republic is the of Iran is the head of the Shia Muslims. It's the only state that is about Shia Muslims. Kind of like what Israel is to Jews, there's one state that is about Shia Muslims, and that's Iran. Iraq is to some extent, but Iraq is much more diverse and Arab, which actually creates complicated things about it, as the majority of Arabs are Sunnis, and Iraq is a bit of an identity crisis on its own as a country. That couldn't probably need a full episode. So when it is possible that the US will be involved in counterinsurgency, when you ask the question about long term stalemate, it's very possible that if the goal is regime change and the goal is to replace the government and fight a new government, um, then the war will transfer from formal war between a state and a state into a war versus a non-state actor, which is what we had, for example, in Iraq in 2004 with all of the non-state actors. So that's also very possible. So even if the regime weakens and region collapses, the United States could still be involved in a counterinsurgency war, not necessarily a full scale war, but uh, constant operations of attacking militias and proxies of sometimes as Iranian proxies. I think that's going to be continuing for a long time. I don't think that's going to be fixing a couple of weeks. Um, and so I think as of now, I think we are heading for something longer, much longer, if the goal is regime change. If if a Trump administration comes back again and says, no, 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 this is not really about regime change. We just wanted somebody to play ball with, and we killed Ali Larijani because he wasn't willing to accept proposal that we have made, which includes, I think it's 15 points. And then there's a new leader that shows up and he accepts the 15 points. We're willing to negotiate with him. Um, as we have seen in these situations, yeah, probably the administration will change its mind, and then they find somebody as like who they would be, who is left to negotiate with. I don't know. I mean, there are mentions that the Speaker of the Parliament now is one of the potential negotiators. The um, and he's alive yet now, and the Foreign Minister is alive, who's Arakchi. So I think that as of now, there are some people that the U.S. can talk to, and the question is whether they will accept the 15-point proposal or not. Is pretty. We'll see. I mean that's a. I mean the war is ongoing, so things kind of change pretty fast. And if the Iranian regime possibly sees that survival is a threat, they might be willing to concede more than average. I hope that answers your question. Someone asked, what are you hearing from people in the region? What are the sentiment towards Iran and Israel and the war at large? So, what I'm hearing from the people in the region, so that, let's kind of divide the region. You have the Gulf, you have the Iraq, Syria, you have Iraq, and then you have the Levant, which is Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and Israel. And so the the Gulf parts, um, the what I'm hearing is that there is a lot of change of sentiments uh, towards Iran. For so there has not been as much destabilization the Gulf had since 1991, since the Gulf War, in when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and then there was a massive destabilization happening there, and he also invaded and attacked Saudi Arabia. So this is the biggest destabilization they've ever had since 1991. So it's been, and that is my age. So I was born 1991. So it's been 34 years since they've had anything that significant. This significant in terms of destabilizing, in which their airports are shut down, the rockets and drones, and so that the Gulf um, opinion on Iran is shifting. Particularly, I mean, the most interesting one is Qatar. I mean, the Qataris have generally tried to play ball with the Iranians for a long time. They share a significant oil reserve together, and they have not really been antagonistic to the Iranians quite much. I mean, for anyone who watches Qatari media from Al Jazeera to others, will know that the Qataris were not necessarily antagonistic to Iran. That is changing. So that's a very interesting thing. The country that has been interesting as well as Oman. So Oman, for those who don't know, was a host of the negotiation between the United States and Iran. Oman has mostly been labeled as a Switzerland of the Middle East. They tend to be more neutral, not interested in kind of picking a side. Um, there are some kind of at least statements that are coming from some people there that shows that they have picked a side, which is the Iranian side. They think that Iran is the kind of the victim is in this conflict. Um, and kind of it was not the one that started the war, and it's more of a kind of country defending itself. So that's interesting. So the Oman, interesting. I mean, Bahrain definitely. Uh, the there was very interesting things. So Bahrain is majority Shia, led by Sunni monarchy. There were some videos of people inside Bahrain celebrating the attack on their country by Iran, which was very weird to watch, where people are celebrating foreign attack, and that's And that's what brings me back to the what I was talking about in terms of whether Iranians would side with their foreign invader against the regime. That's it's always viewed with a lot of skepticism among the local population. So it would be really interesting to see that. So Bahrain, yeah, there were some people who are, I guess, nationals of Bahrain who are celebrating Iran's attack on them because they dislike the government. So Kuwait has been interesting as well. There were multiple Hezbollah and kind of Iranian proxies that were found in Kuwait. So Kuwait was really is combating Iranian operations inside their country. The Iraq, uh, it's it's I would say polarized as usual. There are people who are really have um in now called the bought the Iran Kool-Aid, like a better word. So the a significant amount of defenders of Iran, Islamic Republic come from Iraq. So there's a lot of people who are really sympathetic to Iran there, and there are people who are not. So there's one of the people we have hosted. His name is Aqil Abbas, who's a political analyst who um, says, I mean, multiple times has said that like kind of the there is a shift within some of Iraq's population against Iran, and we have seen that within the Tahrir protests or Tishrin protests in Tahrir Square in Iraq, there were a lot of people who said, kind of like, no Iran, no US, we want our country to be sovereign. So, which means like we don't want Iraq to be part of the Iranian empire or the Iraqi or the US empire, and we just want to be sovereign and be left alone. That many of these people were killed. So, whether there are remnants of kind of that attitude remain to be seen. The northern part of Iraq, the Iraqi Kurdistan, there were some couple of attacks against the Kurds by the Iranian government or against the Kurdistan regional government. And there has been some uh, statements by the Prime Minister of Kurdistan, Barzani, who was very critical of the Iranian attacks. The Lebanon, I think Sarah Mashnouk quoted some of the latest polls that 70% of the Lebanese people are against Hezbollah, and that includes people from the Shia South. So it's not just Christians and Sunni Muslims who don't want that. So we can see that Lebanon has a potential in terms of kind of the government being in charge instead of Iranian proxies being in charge. How likely that will happen, we shall see. There was the 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 things are ongoing in Lebanon, and whether the the Lebanese government want to do that job or to some extent outsource it to Israel. And then if Israel fails at it, then they can blame Israel. so so it's very possible that the Lebanese government might not want to be the one killing its own people, and they would kind of outsource. So that's a very cynical take, I know, but um, it's much easier to direct the responsibility towards Israel, which is pretty violent in its approach to some of these conflicts. So it's very easy to kind of direct anger towards the state. Um, the we got a question. Do you think the conflict is Afghanistan related to what's happening in Iran? Um, Not directly, but what's interesting as a new player that is coming to town is Pakistan, which is the one launching or launched the war against Afghanistan over the past couple weeks, and which has really been buried because of the war in Iran. Not many people are actually familiar that there is actually a war happening right now, another war happening in Central Asia between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Pakistan appeared now as like a negotiator in creating a ceasefire between the United States and Iran, and so that's interesting. And there was reports that Iran requested that they only meet with JD Vance and not meet with Rubio or Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. So that's a very also interesting revelation. But again, it's like these are a lot of different news, and it's hard to know really what's true. Some people, I think Iran denied that this actually even happened. Um, Also, they denied that they have offered a gift to the United States. That's what Trump talked about, is that they have given us a big gift in terms of all the energy. The Iranians are denying that they have given any gift. So really, it's pretty confusing formation ecosystem. But in terms of the question is that are they related? I think not. I mean, a lot of things are related, but the war in Afghanistan and Pakistan is against the Taliban. The Taliban has a very weird relationship with Iran. Sometimes there are situations where um, the they work together. Sometimes they kill each other. It's They both have interest to fight the Baluch, which are a minority that exists both in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. Um, so it's a very kind of weird. There's a very unstable relationship between Afghanistan and Iran. Um, and now that Pakistan is attacking them, maybe they would side with Iran, and we shall see. It's not. The Taliban has not been as kind of a transnational terrorist group. So it's hard to um, see their effects on kind of a Middle Eastern war. But we have written a lot of articles on Afghanistan by Mansour Ramizi and other people on Middle Eastern coverage. So I hope you check them out to kind of follow the latest news to on Afghanistan and the current and the war there. Well, we got a very interesting question here, and also question on asked before. Yeah, at least yesterday. Is someone asked, "Is this war, Iran, is in the interest of America or the interest of Israel?" Um, very. I know it's a very debated question. So that's it's a debated question, at least on some of the YouTube channels I'm seeing from uh, Piers Morgan and even people on quote unquote the right, like Tucker Carlson, etc., who make the claim that that it was that it's Israel that's dragging the United States into this war. Um, I'm going to give a clear answer on this. Um, 50-50 is the truth. The It's obvious right now, at least from couple weeks now, we're in outside the war is in the war. Sorry, is that there are different that the United States and Israel have different agendas about this conflict. At least it's becoming clear now that the Americans want to weaken the regime and the Israelis want to overthrow it. I think that's a accurate situation. So I don't think necessarily that the U.S. that Israelis dragged America into war. It's just that the Americans have different interests in the region than Israel does, and that's common among any country, right? I mean, the United States have different interests than Canada, which is his closest neighbor, and it's a country that is much closer to it culturally and geographically. And so that's definitely possible. And in terms of the like actually dragging the U.S. And whether this war is in interest of the U.S. or not interest of the U.S., I think there's definitely an argument can be made that having a pro-U.S. assuming that that's one of the goals, but I don't know how likely it can be. Assuming like that we're gonna have a pro-U.S. government or a U.S. sympathetic government in Iran is definitely better than having somebody who calls America the Great Satan. So I think it is definitely in the interest of America that the Iranian regime does change or is not threatening 20% of the world energy. Um, Even though some people have made the argument that now the war is also helping American oil companies because the price is higher and therefore the United States is the biggest producer of oil and in ways that if there is more destabilization there, it's good for America. But so I think I think that's probably a more honest answer than saying that it's engaging in these conspiracies about how the Israelis control America and also acknowledging that sometimes there is different agendas and there are different goals and objectives, and I think we're going to see that as the war plays out, as the war continues. I think that the U.S. has much, possibly much lower tolerance for wars in the Middle East right now compared to Israel. That's a fact. After the engagement in Iraq and Afghanistan, which ended up being a bit of a disaster for the United States in terms of its reputation. Um, I think that there's much lower tolerance for the conflict, and if this drags on, the U.S. might be much more willing to play ball and have kind of a sympathetic, not necessarily a sympathetic Iranian government, but like an Iranian government like that is not as antagonistic as the former one. While the Israelis might not accept that. They would want like a regime that is very different, not just less antagonistic, but very different. So I think that the conversation will continue in terms of kind of the objectives changing kind of quite a bit. And we have the last question from Kathy. Um, and thank you so much, Kathy, for joining us. It says, if the Iran's economy is devastated, how can they continue to fund Hezbollah, and how dependent Hezbollah and Lebanon on Iranian funding? So, uh, Hezbollah funding sources have been diversified significantly over the years. Um, so the there were some news. I believe the Atlantic Council did the interesting report on Venezuela being a major funding of Hezbollah. So there's a Lebanese diaspora that lives in Latin America, a big one, and some parts of it live in Venezuela, who have been um, just played a role in funding the Hezbollah itself. So now that Venezuela has changed, that probably already has impacted the funding of Hezbollah. At least based if you do deductive logic and follow where the funding is. And I think what they would probably miss a lot is the if is Iranian training. Uh, is that because the IRGC has played a major role in training the Hezbollah and is training it, but I wonder if Hezbollah is sufficient enough that can train itself without dependency. I think it's possibly it definitely doesn't help them that that Iran is weaker and destabilized and their economy is devastated. I mean that's um and the question is whether they can continue. That's a very whether Hezbollah can continue is a very big question. And so far, they have proven to be extremely resilient. Until today, I think this morning, they fired rockets. They continue to fire rockets. Um, like we have heard a lot of news from foreign correspondents and, or not that correspondents, but commentators about, oh, it's the end of Hezbollah and Hezbollah is gone and destroyed. And that doesn't seem to be true. Um, they are weaker, yes. Are But are they gone? No. And how long they can continue as an organization, I don't know. There's a to answer. It seems every article that have said that they are gone obviously proven to be wrong. So I'm And that's also another question to which the unknown I call it, I mean, Donald Rumsfeld called it the unknown unknowns. We don't know, or maybe we do to some extent, but not very accurately, how many people in southern Lebanon support Hezbollah. Um, I think Gallup said 20% are against it. Um, please, Saleh Al Mashnouk has the accurate statistics, so please follow him. He's the one who monitors this on day-to-day basis. If that is the case, probably somebody should run the numbers to see what is 80% of southern Lebanon, what is the number of adults in that 80% of population, and how many of them are willing to join the group if it's recreated or rise again. So well, and the funding parts I think can be fixed. It's not necessarily the biggest challenge, but the biggest challenge of any group is finding people to join and finding people with the 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 energy to deal with constant attacks, etc. So we will see. I mean, I think somebody should run the numbers and see what is kind of the likelihood um in their continuing, because Hezbollah is kind of very different than ISIS, for example. Like ISIS has a very significant uh, population of foreign fighters. So to some extent, somebody can make the argument that ISIS is a foreign group to, let's say, Mosul and to Aleppo and people in Syria and Iraq. But Hezbollah is not foreign. Hezbollah is from southern Lebanon. They don't accept members of other ethnicities and members of other countries, only on like a small manner. So I think it's probably much more difficult for them to be gone than other groups that exist in the region. I hope that answers your question, Kathy. Thank you so much for all these really amazing questions. If you can comment and let us know if this has been helpful and for you guys, for if you want more of it or you want less of it and you don't want to see my face again, I accept all answers in diversity of ways. So please comment below in this chat to let us know if this is helpful or not, because we're experimenting. This is kind of our first experiment, whether we should use this technology and or use this platform to um, to talk to our subscribers and our friends from all across the world. Well, so far we have two people who said very helpful. That's not democratic enough, but you also have our email and please, yeah, subscribe to Middle East Uncovered in case you haven't, and please share this with as many as many people as you can. Thank you so much. This is Faisal Saeed Al Matar from Ideas Beyond Borders. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day and evening, whichever parts of the world are you. Thank you.